Welcome to lecture number 4. This is the lecture in which we are going to look at 10 European waterways, all of them that are important. We're giving a lot more emphasis to European waterways than some of the other continents in the world because much of our history comes from Europe, and you are going to get constant references to these waterways in your other social studies class. So that's why we're spending a bit more time on that. So much so that we're going to skip the review of the other things we've done earlier. You have that information in your packet. Be sure you are studying and prepping. Okay, let's go to a map of Europe that shows the waterways that I want you to get very familiar with. We're going to look at the Baltic Sea, right there, the North Sea, the English Channel, Strait of Gibraltar, right down here, Mediterranean, Adriatic, the Aegean Sea, Caspian Sea over here, the Black Sea, and connecting the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, we have the Strait of the Dardanelles right there. Okay? So these are the ones we're going to take a look at. Let's start off with the Baltic Sea. Baltic Sea historically has been very important. It serves a whole bunch of countries. Up here we have Sweden. They are a big industrial exporter. Here we have Finland. The Baltic states are the Baltic Seas, named after these three little countries right here. We have Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Together they're known as the Baltic states. Russia is over here, and they have a major port right here. Although one of Russia's problems is it doesn't have a lot of ports that are open year round, and this is one of them because in the winter it freezes up and becomes unusable. All right, so that is the Baltic Sea. And let's take a look at the North Sea. North Sea has been a route for invasions from the Vikings coming down. Germans during both world wars would send submarines out through here and surface combatants. North Sea been pretty much the center of action for a long time. The big thing going on now, and for the last 20 years in the North Sea, has been oil production. The North Sea oil is split between Norway and Great Britain down here, and they have had a lot of success pumping oil out of there. Because it is so rough, they have had to do a lot of huge amounts of construction in order to get that oil out. This is a look at one of their North Sea rigs. These things are pretty impressive. You can count the stories. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. You got a 5th deck up here. You got the decks down here. You've got basically an 8-story building out in the middle of the stormy North Sea. And this is a kind of a dramatic shot showing the waves bouncing around. So that is the North Sea. North Sea, as we mentioned here, is a big place for lots of oil production and making life very good for Norway, particularly, and Great Britain. Okay, next one we're going to look at is the English Channel. Here's a satellite view of England over here. Let's go back to that, sorry. There we go. We've got England or Great Britain over here. We have France over here. And right here we have the famous English Channel. English Channel has saved England so many times. The Spanish wanted to invade with the Spanish Armada. Couldn't get across the channel. Napoleon wanted to invade in the early 1800s. Whoops, couldn't get across the English Channel. Hitler wanted to invade in the early 1940s. Oops, couldn't get across the English Channel. The English Channel is not all that wide. On a clear day, you can stand right up here and you can see England on the horizon. However, it's a great anti-tank ditch, and invading armies couldn't get across it as long as the British Air Force and navies had control of the English Channel. As mentioned, it's not very wide. It's only about 20 miles wide at its narrowest point. It has been bridged, however. Here, probably about 15 years ago, they built the famous channel. The channel is the combination of channel, tunnel. They actually built a tunnel under the English Channel, and they run trains back and forth there. And a couple of years ago, I got to go on it. Always wanted to go on it. I've been fascinated by it. I knew I would be disappointed, and I was. You're speeding I went from London to Paris, and I was speeding along, and then all of a sudden you have just boom, little drop, and it's dark. You can't see anything out there, and you're in the channel. The only way you know in the channel is there's a little reader board up above on the roof of the railroad car that says you are so far below sea level, so far below the floor of the English Channel. It's kind of a fun thing to do. When you come up on the French side, you come up in what looks like a fortress. They've got concrete bunkers and barbed wire, and even saw a couple of armored personnel carriers out there. And I asked the steward, what's with all the protection? He said, well, lots of immigrants that are trying to get to England, and some of them actually try and go through the channel, which would be colossally dangerous. Okay, so there's the English Channel, very narrow but very important body of water. Okay, let's go on to the Strait of Gibraltar. Oops, so before we do that, here's a famous shot of the White Cliffs of Dover. This is the English side of the channel. You've seen this in movies and everything, and there's even songs written about the White Cliffs of Dover. There'll be bluebirds over the White Cliffs of Dover, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, all right, let's get to the Strait of Gibraltar right down here. Okay, whoops, back up. Too far, too fast. Okay, Straits of Gibraltar are right down here. This is between Europe and Africa. So up here we have Europe. And we got Europe all up here. Down here we have Africa. The Strait of Gibraltar, very, very narrow. At its widest, at its narrowest, it's only 8 miles across between these two. The British, back in the days when they controlled the world, actually grabbed part of Spain and put a Navy base up there, figuring, yes, that would be a very useful place to have a Navy base. And yeah, it's a useful place to have a Navy base. World War II came along. They thought they could keep the Germans from being able to go back and forth across there. Well, with the surface ships, they were able to do that. However, with submarines, it was kind of a different matter. Now, submarines back in the day were pretty primitive by what we have now. They basically ran on diesel engines when they were on the surface, and they usually were on the surface. However, when they would go underwater, they would switch to electric engines. The British had a certain amount of ability to detect them. However, going through the Strait of Gibraltar, the Germans had a real benefit. The Mediterranean side of the strait is much shallower and warmer water. We all know that warm goes up, warm air goes up, warm water goes to the top. Any of you who swim in the swimming pool, it's warm on top, then you dive down, and suddenly it gets colder. But the Atlantic side is much colder, and there is currents that go through the Strait of Gibraltar. From the Atlantic, the cold water is down low. It goes into the Mediterranean. Above that, where the water is warmer, the current goes out into the Atlantic. So what the Germans found is, okay, if we put our submarines down here in this current, we can turn off all the engines. We can just glide through on that cold current. And when we're coming out of the Mediterranean, we come up a little higher and we get into that warmer water, and that current takes us out to the Atlantic. And with the sonar of the time, they were able to pull that off to a certain extent. However, most of their submarines that went into the Mediterranean didn't get the chance to come back out. They were either lost in action or accidents or something. So anyway, Strait of Gibraltar, skinny little piece of waterway right between Spain and Africa. Okay. Let's move on to the Mediterranean Sea. Mediterranean is the longest one. Mediterranean Sea that we're going to look at goes all the way from the Strait of Gibraltar clear over to the shores of Israel. Way you remember this one, it is the longest sea, and therefore it has the longest name, Mediterranean. Big long word, so if you can put that together, that will kind of help you to remember. Mediterranean is been, as far as European history, has really been the big deal. This is where lots of action has happened. Let's take a look at this slide. Okay, here's the Mediterranean with all the countries that surround it. Okay, so we have Spain to the west. Yeah, Spain was a world power, controlled a big part of the Mediterranean one time. And here we have Tunisia, where we used to have Carthage, if you want to go way back in history. They control a big part of it. Italy, of course, that's where the Roman Empire was. They control a big part of it. Greek Empire controlled a great part of it. The Turkish Empire controlled a great part of it. The French even controlled a big part of it at one time. So you look around the Mediterranean, oh, and can't forget Egypt down here. You look around the Mediterranean and you see all of these countries that at one time or another were great powers. Mediterranean was, and it continues to be, a very important waterway. Remember, it's the longest sea with the longest name, and that will help you remember. All right, let's go to the Adriatic and the Aegean. The Adriatic and the Aegean. Here's the Adriatic. Here's the Aegean. So how do you remember which one is which? This is where kids get all goofed up. One way to help you remember, they are in alphabetical order. We have the Adriatic, we have the Aegean. Adriatic, Aegean. If that helps you remember, terrific. Go for it. Just remember alphabetical order. Adriatic, of course, between Greece and Italy, between the Grecian traders and the Roman Empire. The Aegean, between the Greeks and the Turkish. It used to be the Ottoman Empire. So these were important waterways and continue to be important waterways. I got the chance to sail around in both the Mediterranean and the Aegean. Never did get up in the Adriatic, but they are interesting waterways. You see weird things floating out in the middle of the Mediterranean. Every once in a while, you see a Clorox bottle floating by. I remember one night I was on watch and there was something out in the water. We turned a spotlight on. It's a dead mule floating by. The waterways sometimes aren't the cleanest. However, the Aegean is beautiful. When my ship was up there one time, remind me to tell you that story sometime. When we were up there floating around, we did swim call. And so you could dive off the ship into the water and swim down under the ship, and the water was crystal clear and absolutely beautiful. Adriatic and the Aegean. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, which I think was the Black Sea. Shoot, that's not what I wanted to do. Let's go back. There we go. Okay, Black Sea is right up here. It is connected to the Aegean Sea by the Dardanelles. Let's take a look at another view of the Black Sea here. There's the Black Sea. This is an aerial view. You can see who surrounds the Black Sea. And at the bottom, you have Turkey, but right up here, you have Russia, okay? Russia controls all of this. Now, Black Sea has been in the news of late because the Russians just a few years ago grabbed this right over here. This is called the Crimean Peninsula. This is the country of the Ukraine, and this is Russia over here. Originally, Crimea had been part of the Ukraine, but there were lots of Russians living there. And Russia wanted to grab Ukraine because they've got a big naval base there. And Ukraine was starting to be more Western oriented. And they were afraid that eventually the Ukrainians would say, hey, we don't want your naval base on our territory anymore. So Russia solved the problem, simply went in and grabbed the Ukraine. There's a little bit of, yeah, we'll talk about that later. Okay, so grab the Ukraine. So this has been in the news quite a bit lately. But that Navy base right about here, Sebastopol, the Russians' big problem, and we'll talk about this later too, is they have trouble getting to warm water. Most of their ports are up there where they freeze during the winter. However, this Navy base is warm water all the time. However, to get their ships out, they have to go out through the Straits of the Dardanelles down here. Bosphorus Straits, Sea of Marmara, and the Dardanelles down here. So that's the Black Sea. All right, let's take a look at those straits. There they are. Okay, so we have the Black Sea up to the northeast, and the Aegean Sea down to the southwest. Okay. Russian ships have to go through here into the Sea of Marmara and down through the Dardanelles. Now, if these look very narrow to you, that's because they are incredibly narrow. The Straits of the Dardanelles, at their narrowest point, there's only 4 miles. Well, 4 miles wide down here. Very easy for the Turks to shut that off to the Russians if they wanted to. Even narrower is the Bosphorus Straits up here, where it is down to a half mile. Let me show you a picture here. This is a bridge over the Bosphorus Straits. This is what connects the Baltic with the Aegean and the rest of the world. You can see this is very, very narrow. If the Turks wanted to close it off, they certainly could. This is the city of Istanbul. And at night when you're visiting there, one of the big deals for the tourists to do is if you can get a willing cab driver, give him just a little bit of a tip. He will stop right in the middle of the bridge up there. And very quickly you can jump out and you can stand with 1 foot in Europe and 1 foot in Asia, because over on the left side, that's Europe, and on the right side, that's Asia. So yeah, if you can find a willing driver to do that, you have something to brag about. Okay, so that is the Strait of the Dardanelles. Okay, which leaves us with the Caspian Sea. Okay, Caspian Sea, this is an aerial view of it. You look around the Caspian Sea, and who do you find? All right, over here we find Russia. Okay. Here's the Black Sea over here. Here's the Black Sea. Over here we have Iran. Okay, not our best buddies right now. Iran. Over here we have the stands, which we'll talk about later. We have three little countries here, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. We'll be talking about those. But the Caspian Sea, right here. The Caspian Sea is got problems. The Russians have never been the greatest ecologists in the world and been quite freely dumping stuff into the Caspian Sea and pretty well messing it up. If you ask what the Caspian Sea is famous for, most knowledgeable people will tell you caviar. Now, you've probably heard of caviar, probably not tasted it. And guess what? You haven't missed much. I bought some just so I could taste it. It's wildly expensive, and I thought it was wildly gross because caviar, yeah, basically it's fish eggs. Some people really go for it, though. But more recently, Caspian Sea has become famous for oil. Down in the southern parts of the Caspian Sea, they are discovering lots and lots of oil, and we will talk about that later. Oops, that's not where we want to be. All right, so we hit a whole bunch of whole bunch of seas when we did the waterways of Europe. There's 10 of them there for you to remember. So be sure that you are taking a look at those. I wanted to review it with you, but there we go. Right there. Okay. So we have the Baltic up here. The Baltic, the North Sea, famous for oil. English Channel, kept England safe. Straits of Gibraltar, about 8 miles wide. Mediterranean Sea, this is the one with the longest name and for the longest sea. Remember the Adriatic and the Aegean because they're in alphabetical order. We have the Black Sea and the Strait of the Dardanelles right there. Now, one more word about the Caspian Sea. I have had students tell me this looks like a ghost. And they say, Mr. Anderson, we remember the Caspian Sea because of Casper the Friendly Ghost. You remember Casper the Friendly Ghost, friendliest ghost you know, maybe you don't know it. But they say, here is his nose, here is his chin, here's his hair flowing back. And because ghosts are kind of wispy, he says, all of this looks like the wind is blowing the ghost. So I'm not sure I see it. But if that helps you, that is great. Go for it. Okay, there you have it. Those are the waterways of Europe. When we get together next time, we'll be looking at latitude and longitude. You have an assignment with latitude and longitude, and I'll help you do that on our next little lecture. Be sure you're studying everything we've looked at so far. And hey, you guys are great. Look forward to our next lecture.